Look. Good evening and welcome to Green Watch. I'm your host, Peter Salas. I'm filling in for Treasure. Tonight we'll be discussing problems with white leadership, understanding the need to listen to the messages of our black and brown voices, and the importance of representation and diversity in the media. Uh, and our guests today are V. Patel-Adams, and they're a member of the Belly of the Beast Media. Mo Cortez. He's a grassroots advocate here in Houston, and Rosie Soto. And you've been a lifelong community organizer. So, could you could each of you tell me a little bit about what kind of work you do and any projects that you're currently working on?
Yeah, sure. I'm part of a new collective called the Belly of the Beast Media Collective. We are a non-hierarchical, anti-authoritarian, radical collective of people of color, black and brown folks, making media about black and brown folks. And we are technically an anarchist collective, but we don't like to use that word because it's very Eurocentric, kind of what we're talking about right now, right? The problems with white leadership and white messaging. So we call ourselves a radical anti-authoritarian collective. And yeah, we just started a few months ago. We've done some great interviews pretty recently. And you can check us out at bellyofthebeastmedia.org if you're interested. And we're also really encouraging people to get involved. It's an open collective. If you're a person of color and you want to submit something, just check out the website. It's any kind of media.
Okay. Mo, could you tell us a little bit more about the kind of work you do?
Certainly. I'm an intersex and trans and criminal justice reform advocate. Under the intersex community, myself along with Kuma were the first ones in North America that are intersex that actually were able to introduce the intersex protective bill for intersex people by intersex people in 2017. So myself and Kuma and Interact Advocates are working on basically intersex policy here in the States, in Texas, in the state, to help and assist the intersex community. I'm also on the board of Grassroots Leadership, aka Texas Advocates for Justice. We're an organization that does criminal justice reform, basically, houses, not handcuffs. So, thank you.
Okay, Rosie, so you're a lifelong community organizer here. Could you tell us a little bit about your work and?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, first of all. And so I like to help people in need. I don't really have a specific goal other than just helping people that need help at the time. So I've been feeding the homeless on and off for over 20 years. And then just recently with Hurricane Harvey, I started helping some really disenfranchised communities that were completely ignored by the supposed helpful organizations that were put into place by, government entities or, the traditional Red Cross or United Way and such. These were people that were completely absent in communities of color. There were people who were without food for over 2 weeks after Harvey, while the rest of communities that maybe did not need as much help were receiving, lots and lots of help. So right now I just organize people to help me find food and get it out to the homeless. So we just, do whatever we can. The houseless. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's inspired you to not just take on these endeavors, but continue these endeavors? So,
Well, I started being an activist because of the cops, because I got arrested for something I didn't do. Long story short, that's my inspiration. I'm really sorry that I didn't start being an activist and I didn't start doing like anti-police brutality work before that kind of stuff happened to me, but that is ultimately what made me be an activist. And I joined the Houston Indie Media Collective, which is on 90.1 KPFT, because I didn't know where else to go because, I was just dealing with all this really, really messed up stuff that the state was doing. and they were like, come in and do a headline, and I did, and I just fell into doing media. Yeah.
And Mo.
I think with me, with intersex and trans activism, I would say it's more out of a place of need, in that it's self-serving, honestly, in that this happened around 2016 when we threw around the idea about introducing an intersex bill, and just me thinking of basically trying to be the person that I wanted to be or needed to be, that I needed when I was a little kid. So basically just me trying to be the person that I needed when I was younger and trying to help out these people that need help now and advocating for voices that are usually, you know, overlooked and forgotten and honestly aren't funded. And in regards to criminal justice reform, it takes a personal hit to me. My father passed away in Huntsville Penitentiary in 2002, but just lately, I've been trying to reconnect with my family, my roots, and just trying to basically reconnect with a part of my life that I had, excuse me, I closed out. So just out of a place of self healing is where I come from.
Okay. And Rosie.
Yes. So, how did can you repeat the question?
Like, what has inspired you? What helps you continue
Just to
with your
be
work?
a change, just to be an advocate for change, really. In my personal experience in the past, when I've been a person that has been in need and I've had lots of doors shut on me, and I've watched people, friends and acquaintances and such that have reached out for need and have not received the need that they deserved. And so I want to go against that grain of people manipulating who is able to get help. I want to be able to make my own decision and say everybody can get help because everybody deserves to be helped. And with one person changing the way that they do things and the way that they perceive who is allowed to be helped or who deserves to be helped, I would like to think that I changed somebody else's perspective, and I really have been witnessing here lately a lot more people getting involved and helping a lot of people just because they come, they work with me, they see what I do, and they get excited, and then they go out and do things on their own. So it's really, really exciting.
Okay. So all of you took the initiative to go out and help our communities. So what I want to ask is, if you guys have any experiences with past organizations that are mostly predominantly ran by like white or wealthy, upper middle class individuals, and how has that like affected how you work?
It's always been bad. For me, it's taught me to work more strategically. Like, unfortunately, I think that, and this is such a generalization, but black and brown folks are more community oriented. We're more honest. We're less about money, and we're more honest. So working, I've been on the board for KPFT. I've even been on the national board. I've been working on the board of KPFT for like 5 years, and that is a white-led organization, unfortunately, even though it shouldn't be because it's for the community, and Houston is predominantly people of color. But what I've learned from that is that, when you're doing these when you're in like a nonprofit or a board, maybe you can speak to this, during these bureaucratic things, white people, and again, this is a generalization, but this is from my life experience, white people do what my mom says, dar makaru, like there's something black in the lentils. They do all sorts of messed up stuff to gain advantage and to get what they want, and people of color don't really do that. So I've learned to work more strategically and take that into account. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So Mo.
Pretty much what they said, what V said, just pretty much just working and dealing with, excuse me, white-led coalitions and organizations. Just to me, this is just my generalization. My this comes from my own personal bias. I feel like a lot of white advocates are more about being in front of the camera activists. So whenever the camera's there, they're helping out the people, they're helping it
It's
people in
true.
wherever. But when the camera turns off, it's us. We're the ones that are doing the work.
So
We're the ones that are not, that are not getting the pat on the back, or it's thankless work and helping out the people, and they don't see the things that we see. And honestly, they're not equipped or emotionally competent to deal with those, from what I've noticed in my personal life.
And tell us about your experiences dealing with that.
Yes, so in my experience has been, and I can speak directly to an instance where I reached out to the Houston Food Bank, and I was told that this was probably a year after Hurricane Harvey, and they were saying that they had so much food that they didn't know what to do with it. And so I reached out to them and told them that I had all these communities that could use the food or whatever, but because as a general rule, I have found in my experience, people of color, and I know because I'm a person of color, we're not trusted with our judgment. We're not trusted with money. We're not trusted with making just big decisions in regards to, in my experience, for getting food out to these big communities. We're talking 300-400 families in any one community at the time or more, and the need wasn't sufficient. It wasn't sufficient that I was going to them and saying, I can get this food out. No, but at the same time, a friend of mine who is not a person of color went, and they were like that. They gave them food. So.
So I would say like that definitely seems like it's kind of interfering with any of the work that the community organizers and
yeah,
activists, like all of y'all, want to do.
yeah. So I mean, for me personally, I just don't do it anymore. Other than KPFT, which I'm just holding on to hope that we can bring it back to the community. I don't really work with like white organizers or white organizations because it's pointless, straight up. And there's a lot of like the Houston Food Bank. There's a lot of nonprofits in Houston that have a lot like high financial values that are being run by white people. For example, KPFT, the the Harris County Green Party, and now there's like the Houston Green Party. Houston Peace and Justice Center is another one. They have all these like huge nonprofits that have a lot of financial stake are being run by white people, and it's really sad because they're not sharing the wealth, they're not passing on knowledge or anything like that.
Exactly.
So and it sucks because like that's where the money is at, but you can't nothing gets done when you work with these organizations. It's easier to be broke and work with other people of color because at least we have the same, at least we're not doing it for the cameras, you know what I mean? At least we can get along and do it well. And direct action is really important, like growing your own food and stuff like that is very important as well. Things you can do without white people.
So so you mentioned that direct action is a good way to try to change or create change without necessarily having to rely on, these mostly these white wealthy
Yeah.
organizations.
For sure, we think of direct action sometimes as like, a huge mobilization of people or something, but that's not true. You yourself go into your garden and plant a tree, assuming you have a garden because we live in Houston, right? But if you just plant a tree, put a plant, that itself is direct action. You know, there's so many things that you can do just as an individual, and I think that those things, it seems like sometimes are more effective. With Belly of the Beast Media, we make our own media, and we don't use fancy equipment. I use my phone and Audacity, which is a free a free app that you can download on your computer. So direct action is very, very important, and it's not about like being in big groups of people for sure. It's
And you actually wrote legislation
Yeah.
as well, so that's actually pretty interesting because a lot of people don't really think that we can affect a lot of change. Like nonetheless, we're
Oh, yeah.
still living in a society that there is a ruling body over us, so we can do as much direct action as we can, but also calling attention on in those high offices. And Rosie, you started you started kind of your own little organization as well for That said, a lot of people um, don't think that they can do these kinds of things. It's where have you found, comfort? Like you said that despite the fact that you're not working with like a lot of capital, but you do have kind of people coming together. Like, what helps? I guess what kind of message would you have for people that would want to do kind of work like this?
I always like to say, think outside the skillet, you know? So we're not taught, as a general rule, to think about food waste or where extra food may come from to help people. So when you're at your restaurant and you're enjoying your meal and you think that some food might be, let's just use, for example, a restaurant is getting ready to close and you're one of the last customers there. Initiate a conversation with the restaurant manager and say, hey, what do y'all do with the food once your restaurant closes? If you have any food left over, what do you do with it? Just be that person that initiates that conversation. And they may tell you all sorts of things, that they don't give away their food. And, there is the Good Samaritan law that protects, because a lot of restaurants feel that if they give away food, that they run the risk of somebody getting sick, and then somebody suing them. So the Good Samaritan law actually protects the restaurant from being sued, so that they can give their food away. And now we see a lot of different cities taking up the action of, making it. I'm not necessarily talking about the U.S., but in other countries, picking up that slack with the food that's being left over, and they're making it illegal to throw food away when there's people starving down the street. Yeah. So, just initiate the conversation. Talk to people. Talk to your grocer. Talk to the people that you see are serving food in some way, even like at a festival. That's one way to address it.
So those small changes that eventually kind of just lead to kind of, I guess, a snowball effect into creating change, like one person at a time. A lot of people feel like that you can't make change one person at a time, but I feel like we can.
For sure. And then, if you're thinking something, we're not that unique. You're probably not the only one thinking it. So, like, say it out loud, Just say, I guarantee you won't be alone. If you're thinking something, if you see something that is, like, wrong, especially just in your gut, say it.
And to build upon that, one thing I think is important to kind of mention is that, um, we're all superheroes and we're doing our best and we're helping people out, and people see that. That's great. They love us. We love them. But it's not all roses. I'm like, they don't see the work where, it's 2 in the morning, you're trying to work on something, or, you're just doing this labor, this emotional labor, and this, I guess, cognitive labor. It's taxing. I mean, because people, it's not easy to go out to a public forum, like where there's politicians or political candidates talking and saying, hey, I'm intersex and blah, blah, blah. How are you going to help intersex people? Or how are you going to protect black and brown trans women here, right? It's not easy doing the work, but like what they were saying, what V was saying is that, you're obviously not alone. We're not alone. We're not isolated. But they want us to think that we're isolated and we're alone, and that we don't have any resources, which we don't have easily reachable resources, but we do have resources. When we come together and come from a place of courage and not from scarcity, because that's what they want. They want us to just stop, quit, be apathetic, go home, cry on the pillow, not worry about, No, it's about coming together as a community from a place of courage, and just giving our best efforts and just doing self-care and community care. So what that looks like is pretty much different for everybody, but at least food, clothing, sleep, and housing, and community. Saying, hey, my friend V, they're struggling with blah blah blah. Let me go help them out and buy blah 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 or whatever it is. So
There's a direct action,
yeah.
solidarity. Those are all, I think, very, very vital parts
Oh yes.
of being activists in the community. So I would like to talk a little bit about, let's talk about a little bit about the mainstream media, because we know that, while there is a form of representation in our media, we know that that alone is not going to solve a lot of the socioeconomic and systemic problems that we have in our communities. And the message behind representation is vital. So one thing, do you feel like the media today, and let's say our artists and musicians and our music and our television, do you think it's creating a facade or in the minds of the public where we don't really think about the problems that our communities are being afflicted by? And how has that kind of hindered the people from taking a stand and to do these direct action, to do direct action? If you kind of like understand.
I understand. That's a great question. I think really everything in our society, definitely mainstream media, entertainment media, but also news media, is creating a facade. Like something we were talking about before the show, how the mainstream media doesn't show. There's this apathy, especially specifically we were talking about what's going on at the border, the southern border. There's this apathy that people have, but part of it is that they're not seeing what's going on because our media is not showing them. So yeah, it does create. I don't know if yeah, it does create that facade, and it creates a lot of apathy in turn.
And well, like, how do you feel
I
about?
feel like just the money to interest, really. If it's, a bar of soap or shampoo or the next, oil refinery, it's all about the corporate interest. And it gets frustrating, honestly. Yeah.
And like food problems as well. With you, Rosie, that's because we see people being fed on television, and well, now we're noticing a lot of the homeless, well, houseless. I like that. A lot of that, the houseless community, how they're we're seeing it. We're seeing the problem, and yet it's ignored.
And then one thing that's, if I may share, one thing that's happening is like now it's popular, or it's, people come out of the woodwork literally to help these communities of people in need right around the holidays. But then they're absent the rest of the year, and there's just a few organizations that are actually coming forth and, doing this on a regular basis, and, coming out at least once a week or twice a week. And now it's so popular. And then, there's like the entire summer, spring and summer, there's this huge lack for these communities. And then all of a sudden, Halloween happens and everybody starts coming out of the woodwork. And then it's like the surplus. Like, I went to the community that's over here right on Chartres, and I was amazed at how the what do you call it, the dumpsters were overflowing with, packaging, and because they can't keep up. The people that I spoke to are saying, oh, well, we just ate, and they fed us 2 hours ago before that. And so can we find a way to space that out? Can we find a way to coordinate amongst each other so that we are doing this all the time, doing it on a regular basis? And
I need to be
and
a part.
and
No, go ahead. I want to say
one of
something.
the things that I find is, people will use the excuse, or it might be their reality at the time. I'm too tired. I just got off work or whatever. Sometimes I get off work and I go home and I cook for 2 or 3 hours, and then I still go out, and nobody's asking me to do it. I do it because it's the right thing to do. I would want somebody, hit my microphone again. I would want somebody to um, take that extra mile and say, I'm tired, but I'm still going to go out and do this because there are 15 people on the street and I'm sure they're hungry, or they're cold, or they, need a bath, or, whatever it is that you can do.
But you know how you were saying people do things, white people mostly, or upper class people do things in front of the camera. Do you remember during Harvey? I think it was called the Montrose Collective. It was a bunch of restaurants that got all their extra food together, and they were able to serve so many people with the extra food. And then after the cameras
They left.
stopped, that just stopped. But that would be, we could on the daily feed like all of the houseless folks in Houston if we just kept doing that. And it worked. It was such an efficient system, you know? It worked beautifully. The restaurants would cook the food, we had people pick it up and take it. Like, it was no waste. And so many people got fed. It was amazing. But, you know, once the camera stopped, it stopped. So it's totally, we know it's possible.
Yeah.
You know, we know it's possible.
It's completely possible.
We've seen it done.
And we so that's since our show is about, we're talking about white leadership, and I think that it goes on all levels because, you know, from the community to the media, you know, to the media. One thing that I always found a lot of interesting is Houston. They had really good hip hop and like screw movement, and a lot of the music was talking about the struggles in these communities, and it was creating a lot of class consciousness, and you know, I guess consciousness and these systemic problems that we have today. And now we have the opposite with our mainstream music talking about money and wealth that we obviously don't have. Yes. Do you feel like there could be a way, since Houston was at the cusp of this movement, for us to kind of go back to those roots? Because while having media and information out, music I feel is very important
Yes.
whenever it comes to movements as well. So, do you think there's any way possible for us to maybe go back and I guess feel that nostalgia again?
Yeah, music is definitely media, for sure. I think it's possible. I think for me personally, I'm very analytical, I guess, and I believe you have to look at the root of it, you know. And the root of it was by people of color, and it was and it was for good, you know. And so I think it can definitely go back to that. But we, even as brown people, we need to help. We need to encourage black representation. Like, there's not a black person here right now, and that's a shame, you know. We as brown people, who in many ways can be more privileged, you know, we all have our own privileges, and we definitely need to encourage for more black representation, more trans representation. Those two things are like extremely lacking.
I think that,
But yes.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, to answer your question, yes,
Yeah.
it can definitely go back to that.
I lost my thought. What was your question again? Sorry.
Do you think we can go back to talking about in our music? Do you think our music could help be kind of a key
Oh,
to awakening the minds of people and like
certainly. I think just what me and Kuma have done through the Intersex Society, the Houston Intersex Society. We founded that in 2012 because we knew each other through high school. We went to this After School Friday LGBTQ like hangout program, and years through high school, we knew one another, but we did not know the other person was intersex. So, yeah, I think that, so what we've done to go wrapping back up to what the Houston Intersex Society has been doing is just doing art, you know, just basically like making short movies, short little stories, and also encouraging other people like our allies, like my really good friend Andrew Shell. He created a song. It's called "Leave My Body Alone," and it's amazing because in a million years I never thought my story would be so strong enough or so moving enough for someone to feel motivated to write a song to say, you know, just like leave intersex children's bodies alone. So I think arts and culture, yes, they play important fact and a part in that.
yeah. Okay. So we all know that kind of. I actually kind of I want to talk about the legal system because you mentioned you do work with criminal justice, and we've all kind of had people of color, unfortunately, are disproportionately kind of targeted. A lot of times, the mistrust that you mentioned, Rosie, whenever it comes to trying to reach out for help in a lot of these organizations, we as a community, we're all disproportionately affected by a lot of these problems that a lot of wealthy and white individuals don't have to go through. So, what kind of do you think do you think there's maybe a connection between how the people that represent our legal system and the fact that they kind of understand that, or they've kind of created or perpetuated a systemic problem? Um, how is that affecting the way that we're able to access a lot of these legal resources? Because you did say the things like the Good Samaritan law can help out, like with restaurants and activism, and well, you've authored a bill to try to help out in the House. Does it seem like almost as if it's intentionally done?
It really does. It feels like white supremacy. I mean, because the person that it was actually at a forum that where I asked a panel of politicians and other people if they would sponsor an intersex protective bill, and it was actually Silvia Garcia, a Latina, who said yes. And the people that have been carrying the bills in 2017 and in 2019 in the Senate, and I mean in the Senate and now in the House, all Latinx people. So yeah, sometimes it's about working within your communities, and these people might be better off, but they're willing to help and to support the community, because a lot of what I've noticed lately these past few years are that different programs or initiatives that myself or other intersex people of color have started, we've had a flood of white people try to Columbus those ideas, and that honestly has been frustrating. It's overwhelming, honestly. It's just overwhelming because these are people who have money and resources and connections that I don't have. And they're able to do these things and want to just take it away, which, I mean, great. If the bill gets passed by somebody else, that's awesome. But it's about, for me, holding the message and holding a consistency, because white people sell out. I mean, that's why.
Yes, so you're trying to keep it as the message as authentic as possible, which I
Exactly.
feel like a lot of authenticity gets lost
Yeah.
whenever it goes into the hands of
It gets gentrified.
yes, yes, the way that Houston has been getting gentrified, and they
That's a
do this
great
with
way to put
ideas.
it, though.
Yeah,
Even when it comes to spiritual practices or words, just to call it gentrified is perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes used for money
Yeah.
most of the time. Turn into something it's not.
Yeah.
With a complete and utter blacking out of these communities.
Yeah.
Literally, they just silence you by moving in and taking over, and that can be in any political movement, that can be in any action that people have. It's happening all the time.
co-opting is definitely a big problem. So because we have from our discussion, we've had problems with not just whenever certain white and wealthy individuals start organizations, and then whenever they try to as well try to co-opt it once a movement is started and once you've piqued the interest of the public because you're discussing things that aren't typically discussed, and there's a large population being affected by this. So these problems, would you say that a lot of these problems are part of this socio-economic system that prioritizes white wealthy individuals and then views a lot of low income, working class people of color as kind of disposable, sometimes even undesirable members of our society?
I mean, if you think about it, what's on the media, like if you just look at entertainment media, it's all like for the most part, it's like middle class people. Sometimes they'll have like a show about a poor family, but that's the whole point, right? Is they're poor. Everyone else is like middle class or like upper middle class, usually white families, so yeah.
And even when it's the right people, like I'm going to name drop the LGBTQ Victory Fund and LGBTQ Victory Institute. They're basically an LGBT organization that helps LGBTQ people run for office successfully, and they give them programs. But I tried to do that a couple of years ago, and they wanted money for their institute to get, like, oh, you want to run? That's great. We believe in you. You can do it. We know you can, but we need about X amount of dollars to do it. Yeah, just write that check out right now, and you can go to the class tomorrow. And with organizations like that, black trans women, and just trans women in general have been targeted and murdered, and they should be taking the initiative to, if anything, to give them the upper hand, to help them out, to say, you know what, let's waive these fees. Trans people need representation in the Texas legislature and in the Texas Senate too, and we need to help and uplift these people, because these people are dying senseless murders. And we noticed that this past session, when four LGBTQ people became legislators, that there was no bathroom bill, right? There were hardly any anti-LGBTQ bills, maybe a few, maybe two at the most, when there were like 25 last session before last. So we can see that just having representation itself is helping. I'm great there's LGBTQ women that are there, but white women don't represent me, and they don't represent my people.
For sure.
Man, it seems like we're afflicted by a lot of problems that don't really talked about, nor are they handled appropriately. Because like there is I would say that there's a kind of cultural, not necessarily a cultural divide, but the inability to actually understand the culture and communities of a lot of like people of color and like low income families as well. If you don't feel it, if it doesn't affect you, you don't really think about it.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
Well, it's really difficult if you've never been taught to understand a community that's different than you. It's really difficult for somebody as an adult. Let's say they grow up and nobody's shown them anything differently, so they've never learned anything different. It's kind of difficult for a person to feel empathy or compassion for a community member that's different than them if they've never been taught that. Instead of being taught that they're undesirable or worthless or whatever adjective you want to use, or that, that not you, but that people want to use, in regards to demeaning that culture. So,
They've actually done studies, multiple studies. White people do not empathize for people of color the same way that they do for other white people. So
it's almost like we are living in different worlds. Our problems are different.
they are. And I also think culturally, historically, white folks, as in general, are more removed from their ancestors and their history and their like true roots to the earth. And we are not as removed as people of color, perhaps a few generations, but not as many generations as most white people. I think that makes a huge difference. We have like this gut instinct that white people don't have, I think.
I feel like family is really important.
Family, yes.
Family, like, it makes me. I get really like I get sad whenever I talk to people and they say they don't get along with their family, or like there's a lot of like rifts in the family, and I feel like that kind of. I know whenever you help out a member of the community, I feel like a lot of times. I don't know if you can kind of feel the same sentiment as I do, but like they're family. They literally become like very very close to you, and you'll help them out as much as you can, and understand them in a different manner.
Well, I think we still have a more communal mindset, black and brown people, because we're closer in history to living that way, and so we get it. It's still in us. Yeah.
And not to negate your point of view though, but like what I've noticed, like going back to the LGBT Victory Fund and / Institute, they might have people of color in leadership, powerful leadership positions, but those people they've forgotten us. Like they might write, oh, this trans woman was murdered, please give us money so we can help. No, you're not helping, so no. So it's a mix. To me, it's kind of just seeing the other angle of like, yes, but then some of our people have just been are just gone.
You think it's like power corrupts?
Power and money, it really is, and fame.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's and you see a lot of people just kind of selling out. They basically now that they're in a different circle of people, you know, you can see the changes kind of that that they have. And I feel like it, you know, whenever you mentioned that, even though we have representation in legislature, nothing is being done. Because a lot of times, even though the representation is there, what it's all about is what happening at the bottom, which is where the community is. And a lot of these changes can't be legislated. Well, I think a lot of them can't be legislated. We have to, we can't bureaucracy, which is something that that I found really interesting. Whenever you mentioned how like we have a lot of these predominantly white-led organizations that have like a lot of that are worth a lot of money, that just kind of, you know, they just forget. They just they're like you could they're Columbusing, I guess the idea.
I like what you're saying. It becomes about the finances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes about the money, and it's not about the community anymore. Oh, another one to add. Well, anyways, sorry.
go ahead.
no,
Now you
it's
gotta
fine.
now you gotta say it.
Well, I'm not sure. I've just been doing some research, but I think actually what is it called? The Unitarian Universalist Church might be one to add to that list.
So it feels like I feel like Houston has a big problem with I don't know, tokenization, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
But I think you find that less when you work with more liberal folks. You find that, and when you work with more radical folks, that's not usually an issue. Radical black and brown folks.
Because I feel like there's definitely a difference with like movements. Whenever like who is really like behind the scenes in a lot of these movements. And it's you know, I feel like it is really important. I really like the work that you do with the belly of the beast. That's really great to have. You know, actually have people of color. You know, people also like poor people, like poverty. I feel poverty also unites a lot of people, just because you're basically facing a lot of the same struggles. You know, in Houston, we have a problem with poverty. You know, we have a problem. That's why we have a houseless problem.
Yeah,
Exactly.
We
A
have,
houseless
Exactly.
people problem because we're people are like wealth, income inequality. Income inequality.
and people forget that most of our houseless folks are children, families. Yeah, in Houston.
Yeah, and you know, in my work that I do in feeding the people that are on the street, the numbers of families with children are growing exponentially
Oh.
since Hurricane Harvey. So
Do you think, and that's
And-
directly related to Hurricane Harvey? You think?
I think it's not only Hurricane Harvey, it's just a disparity between, you know, income and, you know, rising cost of living, and people can't keep up. You know, they're working 2, 3 jobs just to keep up. You know, and at minimal wages. That has to change. You know, you can't expect people to survive on, you know, $8 an hour. That's unrealistic. It's
Still
not.
$7.25, I think here.
Well, whatever. I mean,
Yeah,
just
it's
but I mean, but
It's
people,
not even-
but there's
I
people
understand.
that'll pay $9 an hour. I have my own small business, and I'm a caterer, on top of feeding people on the street, and I pay my people between $12 to $15 an hour, which is more
right.
than, you know, businesses do that make hundreds of thousands of dollars more than I do. You know, I take it out of my pay because I think it's important that I treat the people that work hard for me the same way, and that I would want to be treated at my job.
I feel like that we need more people with that same kind of like thinking. We don't have enough. Like, you know, I don't feel like a lot of bosses, for example, are not very empathetic towards what we're going through, and you know, rent prices too. I remember at a time rent downtown was about $300.
Right?
No.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, I remember.
And our wages are our wages are stagnating. Our the cost of living, food, it's all gone up. It's all risen, and we are living in the communities that are affected first and foremost before.
So I want to add something. to this specific conversation that we're having now. So I think it's really important that we, as people that are communities of color, we have to implement some of those changes in the way that we think when we're doing business and such. We can't just wait for the white people to get it right, because I don't think they're going to get it right. They are conditioned to think a specific way. It's based on their culture. I don't want to sit there and say, you're the only problem. Yes, they're a big portion of the problem, but we also have to take some of the initiative on ourselves to help our people change their way of thinking. Don't, just because we've been oppressed for hundreds of thousands of years, doesn't mean that we need to continue to act oppressed. We can change that. We can change the way that we perceive and the way that we react and be the change that we want to see. And by making the change, then other people come and they follow in. And then slowly, with that huge movement, is where you start to affect, the ripples go out.
Yeah.
And everybody starts to change. So
It seems
I
like
have hope for the world.
so. It seems like it's a diversity of tactics, I would say, that you would have to use, and really talking. I feel a key part is actually talking, and even having discussions like this that we can share with the community are vital in kind of getting the message out. It's not talked about enough. A lot of people don't. Whenever, let's say, some people, whenever they start their business, they're not. What they do is, a lot of people won't do something like you would have done, and pay people fair. They're going to try to.
It's capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about capitalism versus like profitism? I don't know. Capital
What's
is,
profitism?
well, capital is not just like making profit. Capital is making money for the sake of being able to make money. Does that make sense? That is
Yeah.
what capital is. So it's like this endless.
Wall Street, yeah.
Yeah.
Use
It's
your
this
money.
endless pursuit of more money. It's not even pursuit of profit.
I feel, and that's probably a huge problem with whenever you look at the history of how a lot of our community, a lot of our Black and brown communities got to live, or how they started living in poverty, and how it was kind of like generational. You can go back and see whenever in the early early slavery, for example, whenever you were whenever you weren't whenever they freed slaves, what they did is they didn't give people property, and they didn't allow them to, let's say, own property. So it kind of like just it placed brown and Black folks in poverty, and then just kind of kept pushing them towards it. And I feel like now poverty is so widespread that we've had we still have like we still have like wealthy Black and brown people that aren't here to help our community, that unfortunately kind of like hinder change, and they pick sides. They pick the powerful side, the side of power, and that's a very huge problem with not just we do have to create change, but representation and the messaging behind a lot of our representation is extremely important. I really like the kind of authenticity that all of you have. It's very noble that despite pretty much despite everything, despite how tired you are, despite the lack of resources, or like you don't have the fanciest equipment,
Exactly.
Or people not trusting
you don't
you.
know powerful people,
Yeah.
you don't know who will
I
pull
don't.
strings, yeah. Nonetheless, you're going out there and helping in the ways that we can.
Well, it's just the right thing to do, like you were saying.
Right. Well, I want to be part of the change.
Yeah.
I don't want to just envision the change and think about it and lay my head down on my pillow at night and think about it and daydream and whatever. I want to be a person that inspires another person to to make one change, and that person will change somebody else. And it's a great global movement. It's just not being broadcast to us because those that are in power do not want the general public to know that there's a great global change happening. That's why there's so much, squelching of the media and everything for the same reason. Let's just say that and be real about it.
But they can only do so much squelching of the media now that we have smartphones.
Exactly.
But it's like a what am I trying to say? There's one side of the hand, right, where we have all this media or these capabilities like smartphones and cameras and audio, but on the other side, it's also an avenue for them to give us like so much misinformation.
And even when we do, I'm pretty sure you can speak more to this than I can, but like thinking of the indigenous village on the border, the Yaloi village, like tell us more, like how was the media?
Oh, well, we had some media that was black and brown folks who would stay longer and actually help out and who like really wanted to know the people and know the tribe. And then we had so many people come from, there were so many people that came from like LA and just all over, usually white media, that were sometimes disrespectful, to be honest with you. And I don't want to speak on. I'm not speaking on behalf of the tribe or anything like that. That's just what I noticed. And for those of you that don't know, we're talking about Yalui Village down at the border near Far and near Reynosa in Mexico. Is a resistance camp that is being led by the Carrizo Comecrudo tribe of Texas, also known as the Eshtokna. Which brings me to something else that I wanted to point out at some point. So I have like the census numbers here because we were talking about representation from 2010. Native folks are 0.9, and if you add Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, that's 0.2. So that becomes 1.1. So from the millions of people that were here, pre-colonization, the percentage of Native people right now is at the most like 1.1, or what's the word, tribalized Native people, I guess.
Yeah, because I feel like the number is definitely higher. We forget that a lot of people from Guatemala and a lot of people from Latin America are indigenous people.
No, I guess my point is just the way that they're trying to.
The media's trying to
Right,
Yeah,
it's the census, right?
Yeah, the census. Yeah, they're trying to underrepresent, which is I feel like that's kind of
deliberate in itself. Yeah.
And what is this white Hispanic, non-white Hispanic? Are they talking?
Yeah.
Are they talking about like
Yeah.
white passing people? I'm so confused.
basically I felt that because I had to obviously fill out all of this paperwork. I feel like it's kind of like to make you think make you stop kind of identifying with a lot of these problems. Like people at the border, there's people that feel like they're more like white Latinos, so they don't care about like what's going on the border, or there's a lot of like in Mexico. I know a lot of people from Mexico. There's a lot of like anti-Central American sentiment, which is horrible. Everybody deserves respect, and I really like the fact that there's a lot of underrepresentation. And the census coming up in 2020 is also going to be something that's going to be something interesting to see. I guess there's going to be a giant demographic shift in Texas.
And even for a while there, they were even considering not applying census numbers to people that were undocumented, but that was ruled out. And
That's like defeats the purpose.
right,
of the census.
exactly. And so, it's good that that's changed, and now they're going to be taking everybody's information, which is good. But
It's still kind of scary though, I think.
Yeah.
It's
and that white Hispanic or whatever, that stuff, I remember, because I'm 55, and I remember filling out forms way back when, and because I'm not from here, I'm originally from Venezuela. We arrived here, and we had my dad was a transfer student, if you will, and that's how he already had a degree in Venezuela in petroleum engineering, and he wanted to get another degree in chemical engineering. And as you know, school is social there, so he couldn't go back to school there, so he came here anyway. And so like the paperwork that they would have to fill out for us when we were filling out all the paperwork for like the visas, the student visas and all that, and the tourist visas for us, they would, on those forms, they would have question. They wouldn't have like the choice of Latino. They would have like white Hispanic or non-white Hispanic, which is really, really interesting. I feel like though those parameters were put into place to continue that separation, that
Divide and conquer.
and to continue for us to view ourselves differently and less than and not as good as.
Yeah.
I really feel that.
I think it's a big problem with whenever we talk about like indigenous people in Latin America. Like it really is the very fact that not only is there like a lot of shame and stigma behind being an indigenous person in Latin America, but we also whenever you come into a country like the United States, you're felt, a lot of people, it makes them feel like they're foreigners and land that they have an ancestral tie to. And I've actually heard about the village that you're talking about. I think it's a lot of people aren't even aware that there are tribes and there's Native people all over America. It's really important to kind of have these discussions too. We need to kind of take control of the narrative.
Definitely. That's part of what we're doing with Belly of the Beast Media. We have a website, and that's a huge thing. And so it's just a platform. It's a collective, radical anarchist collective. So it's just a platform for whoever wants to put not messed up stuff online.
I feel like there's a lot of messages that need to be out there. It's
Definitely.
It's great to kind of see everybody having, each of you have a different, I guess, different approach, a different thing that you do to try to help out. It's a different message, but nonetheless, it's still at its core. There's a lot of solidarity, a lot of direct action.
Well, we've actually worked together for years.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And one way or another, different topics, different causes, but that's what community does. You're building up the base, you're growing, you're cultivating, and you're bringing more people into the fold, and
Yeah, helping each other out. Yeah, it's community. Yeah.
I think Houston is really, really good about that. We have a really
Yes.
Our communities are very strong in certain areas. Of course, I feel like the closer that you go outside of into more rural, I'm not sure if you feel the same way, but I feel like your community starts to kind of rift apart. Whenever you go outside of like the city of Houston, downtown Houston, there's definitely kind of a difference in I guess people are they're further from each other.
Well, I think the nature of Houston, everyone says, oh, we're so diverse. Yes, but we're also extremely segregated, And then once you get far enough out, like, you have to have a car to survive. So I think that's part of it, too.
Yeah. And I think we're having a big issue behind that because poverty, a lot of people that live in poverty can't afford vehicles. So they walk, bike, or use public transit. And once you start pushing them away from the cities, now they kind of have to find a way, or they get hit by cars, unfortunately, and that's a big.
that's by design too.
Or you just go
Exactly.
further.
That's what I was just going to say.
You also can just go further and further into poverty, which is what happens to most people.
Yeah. Well, it was very nice having this discussion with all of you, and
Thank you.
it was very nice to meet everyone. So this kind of comes to the closing of our show. And thank you, everyone, for watching. And thank you for this wonderful discussion. And this has been Green Watch. So.
And we just want to say one last thing.
Can we do the final words?
Okay.
This is a call to arms.
Call to arms.
Call to arms. Yes. So let's be the change and not wait.
Be the change you want to see.
Definitely.
With power, here they come, international loan sharks, backed by the guns of market-hungry military profiteers, whose word is a swamp and whose brow is smeared with the blood of the poor. Who rob life of its quality, who render rage a necessity, by turning countries into